Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome back to another side of this podcast. I am your host, Lachelle Corley. I want to thank you all just for tuning in. I don't want to go any further without asking you to please subscribe to the channel, hit like if you enjoy what you're going to hear today. It is truly a pleasure to have our special topic and our guests. But before I get into that, for anyone that's new, I want to tell you what you're getting yourself into. The other side of this podcast is a podcast that is focused on shedding light on individuals who have experienced some of life's most challenging and somewhat devastating experiences. And the hope is that not only can you identify with their experience, but also identify with their hope and how that hope has propelled them forward to be the amazing individuals that they are today. So I hope that you're able to get something out of this conversation, to be inspired, and to know that no matter what you face in life, there is another. You to get ready for a real, relevant, and relatable conversation. So, our topic for today is Dry January, a life worth resetting. And we're going to have our special guest today, Mary Beth O'Connor. And I'm going to ask Mary Beth to come on and join us. Come on in, Mary Beth.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much again for just making this time to share your story. Thank you for your courage in sharing your story. And I would like to formally introduce you by reading your bio. So, again, thank you for being here. Okay, so for those of you who may not know, Mary Beth, she is a she has overcome. Let's talk about what she has overcome. She has overcome some of the challenges dealing with childhood abuse and other traumas that have led to a substance use disorder um, very early in her life at the age of 12. Mary Beth has been sober from alcohol, methamphetamines, and other substances since 1994. She is also in recovery from abuse and trauma. The details of her story can be found in her award winning memoir. I have it right here. Get it. There it is. From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. Mary Beth is a board member for Life Ring Secular Recovery and She Recovers Foundation. She is on the advisory committee for the Hyer Foundation. Mary Beth regularly speaks about her personal story on behalf of Life Ring and She Recovers, about multiple paths to recovery, and she shares her expertise on other substance use and recovery topics. She's appeared on podcasts, radios, and television shows. Television, excuse me. She has presented as a keynote speaker and also at workshops on various conferences and events. She also trains attorneys, peer support specialists, and others on substance use and related topics. Professionally, 6 years into her recovery, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law. She worked as a large firm at a law firm in Silicon Valley, and then litigated class actions for the federal government. In 2014, Mary Beth was appointed as a federal administrative law judge. She retired early in 2020 and now devotes her time to writing and recovery advocacy. So, again, Mary Beth, thank you for being here. And I have to add something on here, too. She is a Jersey girl,
Yes.
and so am I. And so am I. So, again, welcome, Mary Beth. Are you ready to dive into our conversation?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Let's go. All right. So, my first question for you is, for the audience. Can you describe your childhood? How your childhood was?
I think it's important to start there. It's why the first third of my book is my pre-drug childhood, to sort of show why excessive drug use was attractive to me. And because the truth is that my story about this is unfortunately not uncommon. And so I grew up with a mom who wasn't really bonded to me, wasn't really interested in me. She was interested in me looking pretty and, being charming and, that kind of thing. But she wasn't really like connected to me. And my mother was violent at times, but mostly she was just very volatile, very involved with herself, very, erratic. But then when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and things got much worse because he was very violent with her. That's a trauma in and of itself for children to witness, parent on parent violence. But he was also physically, sexually violent with me. It was a very high stress environment. And it was also an environment where what I did and what happened to me, they were not closely connected, which is really hard for a child because you can't figure out what the rules are. You learn that his reaction isn't really about me. I mean, I could do things and I try to do things to reduce my risk and to protect my sister to the best of my ability, but I couldn't stop it. And so that's sort of what set me up for finding drugs very attractive once I was exposed to them.
Yeah. And how did your childhood wounds impact your sense of self early in life?
I mean, I knew that there was nobody there to take care of me, and I had a lot of anxiety and also some OCD like symptoms as a really young child. I mean, as far back as I can remember, to like 4 years old or earlier. So I was anxious. Sometimes I was depressed. I had a lot of like repetitive type behaviors, soothing behaviors. But it also was that I really couldn't feel joy because I was in so much pain and so focused on how to survive this environment. So there's a lot of ripples. And we know that children who suffer through traumas are much more likely to develop an addiction, a substance use disorder. So there's a connection. It's also children who have untreated mental health. And I did have PTSD and I didn't know it, although it got worse later because I had other assaults outside the home. But, anxiety, depression, all those things, if they're not treated when the child is young, that also makes them much more likely to turn to substances to manage their pain, to manage their symptoms, and to actually feel happiness and joy in a way that they might not be used to.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just listening to what you've shared so far. And when we talk about, just going back to the beginning, attachment,
Yes,
and when a child has doesn't have a secure attachment to their guardian or their parent, it definitely creates the foundation for a dysregulated nervous system, you know.
that's true. That's true. And you're right, because one of the things that we can do to reduce kids' risk of developing a substance problem is to teach them good emotional regulation skills. And when you don't have that, as you say, that connection, that attachment with a caregiver, that is a very makes you very vulnerable to a lot of sort of negative behaviors, and it can create a lot of problems because you don't know how to regulate your emotions. You don't I felt very sort of debilitated and confused, but I was trying to do my best. It's like I'm a little girl,
Yeah.
I'm trying to do my best, and especially because I had a younger sister, and like many of older siblings, you feel an obligation. You're the oldest. I was also tall and she was tiny, to sort of try to do what I could to protect her, but I could help her, but I couldn't really protect her in the way that I felt I should be doing. And so it can create a really complicated dynamic. You're absolutely right.
Yes, and we can also look at, like, I mean, you just hit it out the park when we think about adverse basis, and
Yes,
the literature shows that, the more a child's exposed to, a high crime area, abuse, any form of abuse or some type of traumatic experience, these put that child at a greater risk for substances, incarceration, etc. Um,
yes.
so the other thing I might go back a little bit, but with the attachment too, you said something that is very important. And a lot of kids go through this. They're trying to do their best to regulate a nervous system that they did not set. So you think about the kids in school, the kids that are problematic in school, those kids are, there's some type of experience that they've been exposed to that has caused them to not have the ability to, again, regulate their nervous system in a way that they can cope with whatever is stressing them. They're
Mhm.
lacking the skills. And when you come from an environment where those skills are not given to you, you do the best you can from what you know. And again, that it goes right in line with what you said. I did the best I could as a child, in which we look to our parents to teach us certain things. And when the parents are not doing that, again, it leaves the child to fend for themselves.
Yeah. And I also grew up in an environment where the adult's behavior was not well regulated, right? I mean, my mother could be very easily triggered and blow up like out of all proportion. My stepfather was raging. It's always been interesting to me that women are called emotional when they cry, but when men are in a state of rage, that label isn't attached to them. But that's what's happening. They are not emotionally regulating. And the truth is, I don't know whether my stepfather couldn't do it or just didn't care enough to do it. You know what I mean? But it didn't matter to me as a child because he wasn't doing it. So the examples you have around you are not examples of here's how you respond to a stressful situation in an appropriate way. Here's how you manage your feelings in an appropriate way. Here's how you handle stress or anger or upset in an appropriate way. I was surrounded by two adults who were just, very emotionally volatile, not behaving as an adult should behave. And that's the example that is set. So it's like that double whammy. You're not given a good example, you're not given the skills, and their behavior is negatively impacting you because you're a target of violence or verbal abuse or whatever else it might be.
Yeah. And for that child, the other part too is all that pain, those wounds, the wounds that they are incurring from that type of treatment, they internalize it.
Yes.
And it impacts their self-esteem, and their sense of self. Um, so my next question for you is, in what ways do you believe high achievement in school helps children who are being abused or neglected at home?
I mean, so for me, I was always an academic star at school. I got a lot of positive attention from teachers. They saw me and they sort of valued my innate characteristics, my innate ability. So that was the one place where I felt seen, where I felt valued, where I was appreciated in a positive way. So that did help me to a certain degree, throughout my childhood. When I was at school, I was in sort of like my happy place. On the other hand, I was very invested in like being perfect at school, right? So perfectionism can be a trauma response. And so I
Yeah.
remember when I was in fourth grade, they gave us a standardized test. It was called Iowa test. I don't know if they still have it, but it was Iowa test. And so I got my score and I had straight 99s on this Iowa test. Like, it was like 10 categories or something. And I went home in tears because I didn't get any hundreds. And like my
Yeah.
mother had to explain to me that it's percentiles and 99 is the highest. But for
Yeah.
me, imagine even if it was possible to get 100, straight 99s. And to me, it was like a failure. I was really, really upset, about that because school was my one positive place. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to lose my special status. And so that
Yeah.
created some perfectionism, behaviors and some sort of anxiety around trying to make sure that I didn't lose the one good thing that I had.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the case for a lot of kids. And I think the point you make even emphasize the importance of teachers and just the interaction. You don't know what that child goes home to, and you don't know how you help them feel seen and heard and appreciated by just, how you greet them, how you acknowledge their progress, etc. Um, so, and the other part is too the perfectionism. That is definitely a trauma response, because when you're in an environment in which you are looked down upon a lot, you try to shield yourself from that. Excuse me. You try to shield yourself from that by not having any flaws anywhere.
Right. That can be one of the responses. You're absolutely right. But of course, it's impossible, right? And so
Right.
it's a standard that you can never live up to. I mean, there's a couple reactions. One can be to give up because no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. It's never good enough. You're still going to get abused. So there can be that undermining of whatever initiative or effort you might have made. You might lose that inclination because you feel like it doesn't help you. It doesn't have any impact. But the other side of it can be an inclination toward perfectionism and overwork. I mean, even as an adult, like when I graduated law school or in law school, I mean, I always worked extra hours. And once I got sober, okay, once I got sober,
Yeah.
um, like at the law firm, I had like some of the highest hours in my class, in my group. And so because I wanted to make sure I did everything right, and so that can create it can create a situation where you're sort of running that treadmill and you're not actually happy. And at some point, hopefully you stand back and look, is like, is this how I want to live my life? But it can become from that trauma response. Kids are different. You can give the same situation can affect the siblings differently. They might react differently. But definitely that can be two common sides: give up or try to be perfect, both of which have long-term consequences.
Right. It's the hyper and hypo.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And the stress that's incurred on each is, it can be very significant. Again, like you're saying, not putting in any effort and then overdoing it. Um Childhood. So in your on page 29, on page 292 in your book, um you wrote childhood abuse led to childhood addiction. Can you elaborate more on that?
So, I have all this, stress and anxiety and pain. And my first drug was when I was 12, and it was alcohol. And what I noticed about that experience was really two things. One is it made my pain feel like at a distance, like I didn't feel as like, tightly bound to it. It was like further away. It was muted. But I also I felt happy, like I was having fun, with my girlfriend. We're laughing and giggling. That is a powerful combination for somebody who's been living under stress and strain. And so that's one of the reasons that it's common. It's sort of like this double benefit. I think we need to acknowledge that in the beginning, the drugs do seem to help. I mean, that's
Oh,
part of why we keep pursuing them, right? If it was
yeah.
a negative experience from the beginning, we'd be much less likely to develop a problem. But in the beginning, they seem to help. You get you get some pain relief. You get like you just don't care about it as much anymore. You're focused somewhere else, but you're also now sort of going to parties and getting high with your friends, and everybody's having a fun and a good time, and it creates a camaraderie that maybe you didn't have before because like me, you were sort of a tightly wound anxious kid, and now you're
Yeah.
looser and you're happier, and people are more you're more fun to be around. And so there's that sort of that double process that can reinforce the drug behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, how would you have wanted your mother to respond differently to her awareness of your drug use as a preteen and onward?
I mean, that's sort of almost impossible for me to imagine. She would have had to have been a completely different person. So I started with alcohol. I
Yeah.
quickly added in weed. I was doing pills. I did a lot of acid my sophomore year of high school. And at 16 is when I started doing methamphetamine, which was my drug of choice. I was shooting meth, intravenous use of meth at 17 and at the beginning of my senior year of high school. My mother never, I mean, for all the things that I got in trouble for, my mother and stepfather never said word one about the drug use. Now, I doubt they knew how excessive it was, how frequent it was, but I also doubt they didn't know something, like I found that
Yeah.
hard to believe, but they never addressed it. I think really it was like they just didn't want to make the emotional and time investment to deal with it. Like it was just, oh, well, it was just too much work, I think for them. Now, I did get arrested at 18, and my mother did find me a psychiatrist at the time because my lawyer told her to. So she did do that, but he wasn't very good. But, she had no way of knowing. But I think she would have had to be a very different mother to have like noticed the drug use earlier, actually cared enough to get me help, to intervene with it so that it didn't keep going and getting worse. But certainly that's what a parent should do. Not, I mean, there's casual drug use of teenagers is one conversation, but extreme drug use of a teenager is a whole, different conversation that a parent, should be reacting into and should be trying to help figure out what's going on underneath drug use and getting them whatever help they need. Maybe it isn't even necessarily substance treatment. It might be other types of mental health treatment that will help them not need the drugs in the same way, or sometimes it's both. But it is something a parent should notice and respond to and get their the earlier that the issue is addressed, the better off the teenager is going to be because they'll have to story fewer things, they'll have less sort of damage and impact and ramifications, and it'll be easier. But it is important not just to say, let's fix the drugs. It's important to say, why? Why
Yeah,
is my teen going to such extremes with drugs? There's a reason for that. There's something else going on. And that should be addressed at the same time so that they have the best long-term chance of success. Too often, parents tell me that, well, they went to rehab, it didn't work, but they never got evaluated for anxiety or depression or bipolar or inability to emotionally regulate or the other things that needed to be addressed if they were going to be able to put the drugs aside in the long run.
absolutely. And prevention is always key. It's good programs like Teen Intervene, and this program is one that is evidence based. Some schools have it where a teen who is casually using drugs, um, not to the degree of like a dependence, or I'll say like mild to moderate use, not a severe use. These programs are designed to be that early intervention to hopefully reduce any more severe usage from occurring. But yeah, you make a great point about your mother would had to been someone different.
That's true. And I will say, look, I wouldn't encourage teen drug use, but there's a certain experimentation that many kids go through and they don't develop a problem. And it is important for parents to distinguish. Like I was talking to a mother maybe 2 weeks ago, and she was really upset that her son was using weed. And I said, well, how often is he? And he was like 16 or something,
Yeah,
not like super young, but still, young. And it is different for teens because their brain is still developing. And so it has an impact. But I said, well, how often is he using? And she didn't even really hadn't thought about that. To her, it was just using or not using. And I said, well, look, if he's using frequently, maybe you can have a negotiation with him and say, how about you just do it on Saturday? Or, like there are ways to have sort of an honest harm reduction type conversation. But if he can't give it up and he's using it multiple days of a week, then there is something else going on that you do need to figure out with him, work with him to figure it out. But she was getting very putting her foot down, and she's not going to allow this in her house, and it wasn't working, and hadn't even had the conversation with her son about how often he was using the drug, which is an important part of the conversation. Your reaction, the appropriate response, could vary depending on if he's using weed twice a month or if he's using weed every day. Like those are two different scenarios that might need two different types of conversations.
absolutely. Yeah, the and also being aware of harm reduction options is important. With teens, the hope is that they're not using any drugs,
Yes, but
right? That's the ultimate hope, abstinence. Even with adults, some adults definitely abstinence, but we do know we live in a real world and there are situations where people are using certain substances that, um, one would prefer, well, we would prefer them not to use, but again, they're using that substance because it's meeting a need. It's meeting a need because something is lacking.
yeah, but if they're using twice a month, it's probably just for fun.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the reality is that most people use all substances in moderation: alcohol, weed, methamphetamine. Most people don't use them to excess. And so, we need to distinguish drug use from drug, addiction, from a drug use disorder. They're not the same thing. In a teen, it should always be a conversation, even if it is casual at first, because of their higher risk, because of their brain development, and because they don't have good good judgment, and maybe they're, somebody smoking weed and they're driving or whatever else, it might be. I mean,
Yeah.
it needs a conversation, an open conversation, which they're going to be more engaged in if you approach it not in a non-emotional, non-judgmental way. Like, let's
Right.
just talk about this, what's going on, try to get them to be honest with you so that you can understand what's happening and what the right next step would be. And again, it's not that I'm encouraging teens to use drugs, but a lot of them will. And there is a distinction between somebody using it for fun twice a month and somebody using it in a more problematic way.
Yes. Absolutely. My next question for you is how did what advice? Nope. You answered that question. You answered it. How did trauma bonding fuel and maintain your addiction into your adulthood?
Yeah, so I had all that violence in the home, but I also had sexual assaults outside the home. I had a violent boyfriend, a lot of other events, and it really it really got to the point, like so let's say from age 22 when I graduated college until 32 when I got sober. During those 10 years, I really felt like my pain was so vast and so deep that I sort of like had three choices. I could use drugs, or I could commit suicide, or I'd end up having a psychotic break and end up institutionalized. Like, I really believed that my pain was that deep and that irremediable. Like, I didn't know that you could heal from trauma. I didn't know that that was sort of like an option on the table. And that kept me stuck for a long time because I couldn't see any way to survive the pain if I put the drugs down. And I will say that's why that is a common fear about, let's say, going to rehab or stopping. It's like, well, what am I going to do with the pain? And it is also a common reason why most of us are literally unable, I mean, literally unable to be perfectly abstinent from day one. Like, I used meth 3 times in my first 5 months. That was a vast improvement, but it wasn't perfect. And there's two reasons why perfection is hard. One of them is your brain is screaming at you, you need those drugs, like it's
Yeah.
yelling. But it's also that when you take away the drugs, the pain starts coming up, and you don't have any skills to deal with it. And also, you sort of have to face your broken life, which is a whole another level of pain, right? But you don't have practice or experience, haven't developed them because you've been using drugs to do that. And so that's part of what can keep people stuck, but it's also part of why it is unusual for people to be perfectly abstinent from the,
From
right from the beginning. Usually they're not able to do that yet. They don't have the skills that they need to do that. So it's sort of that interplay.
yeah, and that's why too. Going to treatment, if you're able to utilize a rehab or something of that level to help you in your process, it is helpful because it's able to give you some skills. It's able to give you some certain medications, medicated assisted treatment
Mhm.
that can help you with the withdrawal symptoms, as opposed to fear like, okay, if I just stop, I'm gonna feel all this pain and I got to deal with it all on my own. You don't. This is why the different treatment facilities are available.
Although I will say that treatment facilities are not of equal quality, right? I mean, one of the problems we have, well, first of all, not everybody can even access treatment. I mean, if you don't have insurance or cash, you often can't get treatment, or you get on a wait list that's like 9 months long. But
Yeah,
also, um, well, a lot of people don't need to go inpatient, like if they're in the more mild to moderate level that you mentioned. But also, treatment facilities, unfortunately, are not all created equal. They're not well regulated. It's hard for people to decide, is this a good facility or not? And as for medication, medication exists for alcohol use disorder and opioid use disorder. For
right.
stimulants, there are studies going on, and some drugs are being used off label, but there's no on label meds yet. But a lot of treatment facilities don't allow medication, so that's a red flag right there. But also, um, medication isn't just for detox. Like, it isn't just to get through the craving period of the detox. For a lot of people, it's longer term than that. Some people might need to be on those medications for 6 months, until they get a little more stable. Some people need to be on them for years. It depends
Yeah.
on their biology and how they respond when they try to go off. So the meds are for more than detox, but they are important for detox, especially for alcohol and opioids. And it is
Yeah.
important to ask questions of a facility. So there's a evidence-based treatment toolkit on the SAMHSA website, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And when people say, how do I evaluate a facility? I say, read that evidence-based toolkit and ask them if they do that. Because it
Yeah.
tells them what an evidence-based program should look like. Do you allow medication? Here's an important question for a treatment facility. What happens if they relapse? If they say we're going to kick them out, that is the wrong answer. Okay. But also, is the treatment facility going to do an evaluation to see, do they also have another mental health disorder? Do they also have anxiety or depression or bipolar or whatever it might be? Because they should be treated for that from the beginning if they're going to have the best chance of success. So it's not as easy as it should be for people to evaluate facilities, but there are some strategies you can use to try to get a better sense of whether this is a quality program. And I will also say, just because it costs more doesn't always mean it's better. So there are some, facilities that will charge you $10,000 a week or a month. And they got a lot of things that sound cute, but they're not always evidence based. So it's a challenging situation. But the main problem too is that we don't have treatment on demand. Not everybody can access treatment even when they need it. And I feel like we judge people that are in an addiction as if we have already offered them treatment on demand and mental health treatment and housing supports and employment supports. I mean, most people don't get that sort of robust wraparound service option. And so to me, it's a problem in our society that we don't offer, but then at the same time, we judge people as if we had offered that to them.
Right. So it's like get help, but hold up. Do you have insurance?
Right.
Do you
Well,
have a
and
job?
even insurance, 28 days. Some people need more than 28 days, right? Even if you have insurance, you
Mm.
can't always stay in for 90 if you need it, or have an aftercare. So yeah, there's a lot of, broken aspects to the system that should be better. But there's some strategy you can use to improve it. And the truth is, not everybody needs inpatient. I mean, there's what are called intensive outpatient programs. A lot of people do
Right.
really well with those. Some people, you can find therapists who have expertise training in substance use, that can be really helpful. So there's more than one path to getting well. And if you really are unable to access any of that, there's peer support, right? And so everybody can access that. There's 12 steps, which is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of those anonymouses. There's Life Ring Secular Recovery. There's She Recovers. There's Smart Recovery, Women for Sobriety. There's a lot of peer support options in person and online. And so at a minimum, if you just can't get access to anything else, peer support can be a really valuable part of a recovery program. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, yeah, we're kind of giving you both sides of the coin with the treatment thing, but definitely, if you are interested in seeking help, definitely seek the support and help. And again, like Mary Beth just said, you may not need a higher level of care like inpatient, but maybe you might want to go to a NA meeting, and a lot of stuff some of this stuff is accessible virtually. They have
Yes.
virtual intensive outpatient programs. They have virtual NA meetings, secular recovery meetings. So it's out there. It's out there.
That's true. And especially for people in rural areas, sometimes online is, all they have access to. And then
Yes,
medication. I mean, a lot of people do we still don't give people medication for substance use as often as we should, but it has been increasing somewhat, and that can be really important as well.
absolutely. So we're going to go to that next question. And the next question is, in what ways were you deceived by your drug use? And I have a second part. How was your life out of control? So the first question is, how did you get deceived by the use? And how was your life out of control because of that?
Yeah, so on the deceived side, it's sort of interesting because there were times where I knew that the drugs were like my biggest problem. Like I would look in the mirror and say, you're poisoning yourself.
Yeah.
But there were other times where I really was confused as to why I kept losing jobs. or why my partner was mad at me, or why my life was so chaotic. So it's sort of this weird, back and forth. It's not like you have perfect clarity about what's actually going on. The reality is that 90% of the problems in my life in my mid 20s to early 30s were because of my drug use, and I didn't really understand that. But also the drugs made me feel like I needed them. It's not, look, you're 10 years into an addiction. It's not like the first fun days, right?
Yeah.
You're not actually usually getting that high. It's more like a maintenance kind of thing, and it can be very, very miserable, but yet you feel like you can't stop. But that's the lie, because you can stop, right? You really can. It feels like you can't. You feel like you don't have the power to do it, but you do have the power to do it. And so that's sort of that part of that deception. And then, I mean, for me, like by 32, I had been using for 20 years. I had started using meth heavily again at the end of college, and so for 10 years, a really long run, mostly shooting meth pretty much every day. I couldn't hold a job. My resume was an embarrassment. Okay, but also I was just feeling very miserable and trapped and like in this small little box of a world, and my partner was ready to throw me out. Oh, and I was having physical problems, and so it was like all of these things together. For me, deciding to go to rehab wasn't like an epiphany moment, like I got a DUI or something. It was really like a wearing down process, and that is what happens to a lot of us. It is very common for people to start getting help for drug use in their 30s, because it's just you've had though it takes that many years for you to get worn down enough that you're willing to turn around and look at it, especially when you're at the severe end, as I was. So it was sort of like that. I just couldn't breathe. I couldn't step forward. I didn't have the energy to put another resume together and look for another job. I was very,
Yeah.
very, very, very debilitated in every way.
And the other thing is too, when you talk about we talk about the disease of addiction, um, it is I call it the great con, because it gives you pleasure, it gives you relief, but it takes everything. I said that's hustling backwards. You know, it gives you a little relief and it takes everything. Your
It
relationships, your
Yes.
identity, your dignity. You end up doing things for those drugs that you would probably not do if you were sober minded. It strips you of your humanity um for the short-term relief.
It really can. But that's part of what can get you trapped, because to try to face all that and address all that. And, I mean, a lot of people have a lot of shame about things they've done, I mean, I had a Berkeley degree in good grades and I couldn't hold a word processing job, like that's like, a hard thing to look at. And then having no confidence that you can actually heal your underlying pain or start over and build a happy life. Like, I thought, okay, sure, my life could get better, but I thought it can get like this much better. You know what I mean? Like, I really thought, oh, it can get better, but like there's sort of like a cap on how far
Yeah.
I can go, because I'm 32. I felt old. I had wasted my education. I had destroyed so much of my life. So it's not like you walk into rehab and think, well, now my life is all going to be great and I'm confident, in this bright future. It's hard to feel that. And that's part of why I share my story, and I talk about shooting meth and the trauma I had to overcome and all the others, is to try to be sort of an example of that it's really possible. And that is one of the benefits of peer support too, because you meet other people who have succeeded, and that can start giving you some hope that maybe that's on the table for you too. When you start seeing people that have a story like yours, but now they're 2 years sober and they have a job and they're maybe like paying down their debt, or they're getting visitation with their kids or whatever it might be, it starts to, embed in your brain that, well, she's like me and she did it, so
Yeah.
maybe I could too. But that's a process. It's not like a snap, it's a process.
Right. That's the other side. That's
Yeah.
the other side. And when we talk about like recovery, I do that's the next question. So I'm gonna give this question to you. I'm gonna make the statement that I was gonna make. How has recovery been like a road of redemption for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about sort of a distinction between sobriety and recovery, right? Like sobriety is a part, of my recovery. It's a fundamental pillar of my
Yeah.
recovery. But recovery is so much bigger than that. And for me, part of it was the trauma healing, the understanding that I had PTSD and getting my severe anxiety under control. But it did allow me to reconnect with myself. Like in my early recovery, I actually did consciously think, was I as a little girl? Like, what was my natural interest? What were my natural abilities? What was, who was I that I might be able to reconnect to my sort of my original self, my authentic self? That was part of it. But then it was also learning things I had never learned. Like, for example, because I grew up in a house where my actions and what happened to me weren't connected, for me to actually go through the process of learning to set goals in my recovery plan, right? Prioritize what I've broken too much of my life to fix all at once. Like it was just too many things, right? I had to prioritize what am I going to work on first? What's my first goal? What's my first plan? Implement that, get ready for my next goal, my next plan, sort of that iterative process. And it sort of helped me learn that not everything that happens to me is in my control, but my efforts are the biggest factor in what happens to me. They are not the only factor, but they are the biggest factor. And sort of learning to trust yourself, that you can guide yourself forward, maybe not perfectly, but overall you can move yourself in a good direction and learn skills and apply them elsewhere, and learn how to deal with your anxiety and all that. And so it was a redemption of who I would have been without the abuse, basically, who I would have been without the abuse. I don't feel like you can ever recover 100% from that kind of trauma, but I really
Right.
view myself as 90 to 95% recovered depending on the day. And so you feel more like you're becoming your true self, and somebody that you're proud to be, and somebody that you're, working for her benefit, working to move things forward. So it's a recovery is a dynamic and robust and interesting process.
Yeah. And for a person similar to your, with your experience in recovery, I view you almost like as a war, like a champion, because when a person is impacted by the disease of addiction, that substance, I call it the great invader. And it's designed to strip you of your humanity. It's almost like, um, for lack of a better way to say it, your essence, right? Your original essence, your original state. It comes to take that. It comes to occupy your body and imprison your original state. The authentic, real person that you are, it replaces that. And it's almost like a master occupying your body and imprisoning your real potential. The real you is imprisoned by that disease. And when a person is able to get into a state of recovery, you reclaim the throne of your body. You reclaim your ability to show up in the world as yourself. Um and that is something that is not an easy process. It is a war, because when you're dealing with the disease of addiction, there's an eternal war going on. And the more you use the substance, the more the invader wins. But when you are able to get into a state of recovery, you defeat the invader. You imprison that invader. And depending on a person's philosophy about the disease of addiction, some believe if you're clean for a certain amount of time, it's a lifestyle change and it's gone. And then others believe once an addict, always an addict. And I hate to use that type of terminology, but just for a lack of another way of saying it in the moment. But the point of the matter is, this is about you reclaiming the throne of your life. So that way you can show up in the world as you, not someone being stripped of dignity in your humanity. So when you are in recovery, you reclaim your humanity. And that is one of the most beautiful roles of redemption, reclaiming your humanity and living a life where your dignity is intact.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple thoughts to that. One is that on the are you recovered or always an addict thing. So the data does show that the more time you have sober, the more stable your recovery is. So for example, 80, if you hit 5 years of continuous sobriety, you only have a 15% chance of ever relapsing again. And that's
Mhm.
not much higher than the risk of the general population developing a use disorder. So you're almost like back to baseline. The other thing I'll say to that is that we hear a lot of this like negative data, like only 5% of people, succeed or 10%. And it's not true. In
Right.
their lifetime, 75% of the people who qualify as having a substance use disorder under the diagnostic DSM test, 75% of them will recover to the point that they no longer qualify. So most people do recover.
Yes.
And most people's recovery is stable. It's usually the first 12 months to 36 months that you have to sort of be hyper focused on your recovery. But that's also the time you have to address what's underneath my addiction, because that's what's going to really make you much less likely to, let's say, develop a shopping disorder instead, or a gambling disorder instead, or something else, if you address what's underneath.
Yeah.
The other thought I have is we do need to be careful about using dehumanizing language. I know what you're saying, and it is true that we do lose sort of a sense of ourselves. But it's also true that people in the midst of an active addiction, they have communities, they help each other, they can be a friend to other people in their community. Like let's say the unhoused, a lot of times they are sort of a social support for each other. And there has been a lot of dehumanizing, like people taking videos of people that are on fentanyl, like let's say out in
Right.
the street in Philadelphia, and they're calling them zombies and using
Yeah.
very dehumanizing language, or this new push to try to force people into treatment, which
Right.
has a very low success rate, is also dehumanizing. But also, why are we trying to force people into treatment? We don't have enough treatment beds for the people who want to go into treatment. Like, let's start there and see who's left over and what we want to do about it, right? But we don't have that, or we certainly don't have it for evidence-based care of an appropriate length. In other words, not just a 21-day spin dry or whatever. So I understand your message and I appreciate that, but I just want to make sure that we do still treat the person suffering as a human being, as someone with autonomy, as someone
Right.
with the right to make decisions about their treatment, as someone who can be loving, even if not always able to act on that love and that friendship. So, but we do lose connection to our best selves, and we do we do end up in a place that we wouldn't really choose to be, and then
Right.
we feel stuck and we feel like we can't get out, even though we can. I mean, we may need help, but there is a path out. So we caveat it a little bit, even though I agree fundamentally with what you're saying.
Yes, and it also stems back to those wounds. This
Yes.
the use is an antidote for the wounds that the person has incurred. And so in my statement, when I'm talking about like um restoring your dignity, it's about being able to address those wounds
Yeah.
and doing the work. And yes, it takes time. It's a process, just like you've been able to do your work, to address the trauma and things of that nature. So that way, when you say I'm at about 95% or so, that's you doing the work to reclaim your dignity. And yes, it's not going to look the same for everybody. So for some people, reclaiming their dignity may look like I'm getting harm reduction treatment because I made a decision that I'm going to be challenged with this type of substance for right now. I see myself very much challenged with it. So the best that I can do to restore my dignity is to possibly receive Suboxone treatment,
Mhm.
or naltrexone, or some type of assisted medicated treatment to help me reclaim my dignity. And when I say reclaim my dignity, it's about you being able to make choices to strive to live your best life, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that when a person is um, fully suppressed by the disease of addiction. It's hard to do
Yeah.
that.
And you're right. That's what the medications are for. The medications give
Yeah.
people the space to start to build up the rest of their life. And I will say
Yes.
most people are able to get off, but some people are not able to successfully get off for whatever biological
Right.
reason that we may not understand. But that doesn't mean that they can't be on buprenorphine and holding a job and being
Right.
a good
Right.
mother and being a good wife because they and being a good citizen because they
Yeah.
can. But in part, the medicine, a lot of people do use the medications for, say, 6 months to a year. It helps give them a buffer of time where they can start to address what else is going on, where they can start to, they don't have to spend all their mental energy and time on getting the drug because they're being given medication. It's so funny that, we would never withhold medication for any other medical condition, but for addiction, somehow it's okay not to give people the best medication out there. I mean, it's really a bizarre scenario that we find ourselves in a lot of ways. But medication can be really critical, and that's part of why when people evaluate treatment centers, it isn't if your family member has opioid use disorder or alcohol, they do need to have that conversation. A lot of
Yes.
times when families tell me my daughter failed rehab 6 times, I say what drug, and they say opioids, and I say, well, did they offer her medication? And the answer usually is no. And that's a real problem within the system. So we need to support people whatever it takes for them to get well. And it is
Right.
going to be different for different people. And different people, that's why we talk now about an individualized assessment, right? That people need to have an individual plan, but it can also be about, do they need housing supports? Do they need sober living for a while or other housing supports? Do they need employment? Do they need to get their physical conditions addressed? I mean, a lot of times when you walk into recovery, people have physical medical conditions that haven't been addressed that are interfering. Maybe they have a heart condition that hasn't been addressed, or HIV, or they have diabetes or whatever it might be. So we need to look at the person as a whole person and figure out all the things that if we give them
Yeah.
half of what they need, then they got half the chance of being successful that they would have had if we gave them all the things that they need. And the truth is, a lot of times in the long run, it's cheaper to actually do these things than to, for example, leave people unhoused who are going to get in the ambulance and going to the ER a lot. That's very expensive. Or they're getting arrested and criminal put in jail. That's really expensive. And
Yeah.
there's often the more humane, more caring solution is really in the long run the cheaper solution, and yet we just too often don't do it.
Yeah, and you're hitting it right on point. It's a holistic. The
Mm-hmm.
whole person needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And you do see some models of like integrative care with some models of holistic treatment, but it's not enough. It's definitely not enough, and for people again to access that level of care can be challenging. Definitely can be challenging. Um, so now we're on the question of dry January.
Yeah.
So what is dry January for the audience? What is dry January, Mary Beth, and how can dry January be a great start to one's sobriety journey, or harm reduction? Cutting back. How can that be helpful?
So dry January is the idea of taking a month off from alcohol and or other substances. And there's a lot, and it's not just for people who think they might have an addiction. It's for everybody. And so what the month off will give you well, first of all, if you aren't able to do it for a month, that is important information that you need to look at. But even if you can, what it can do is it can bring to your attention the reason that you're consuming this substance. So let's just say alcohol, because a lot of people who do dry January, it's alcohol. Alcohol, by the way, is still the number one abused drug in America, and it's still the number one killer, even with the overdose epidemic. But let's say you're going to give alcohol a break for 30 days. One of the things you'll see is, when do I feel the impulse to drink? Like, what's going on? That's information. Do I feel the impulse to drink when I'm bored, when I'm angry with my spouse, when I've had a frustrating day at work, when I'm feeling depressed or anxious? Because that's information. There are other solutions to those scenarios depending on what's going on. It also gives people a chance to actually notice, you know what? I actually feel better when I don't drink. Like I wake up, I'm refreshed, I'm productive, I don't have a hangover. Some people track how much money they save, and it can be really
Yeah.
shocking how much money they save. And you can start to try other activities that you may find, actually, I'd rather go to coffee with my girlfriends than go to the bar. It's not as loud. We can have a better conversation. Let's go to tea and get some treats or whatever. So it's information gathering. And the truth is that most people who complete dry January, most of them don't stop drinking because they don't need to. But what the data shows is that even up to 5 years later, they are drinking less. There's more of what's called mindful drinking. People are making more informed choices. I have decided that the way I want to use alcohol in my life is I only want to drink on special occasions, or I'm only going to drink on Saturday nights, or twice a month, or whatever it might be, because now they see the patterns around it, but also the benefit of not doing it. And so there's been a real push towards reducing alcohol consumption because less is always better. And because a lot of people don't need to stop, they just need to think about what roles are playing in their life and make sort of a conscious decision about how much alcohol they want in their life, or other drugs, or other drugs.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Some other things I'm just going to add to that is I'm gonna share this article on my YouTube channel under the description of this podcast episode. But this came from a website called Prevention, and the title of the article is Seven Dry January Health Benefits That Experts Want You to Know. Mary Beth hit a lot of them, mentioned a lot of them. Some of the other ones were clearer skin, because when you drink, it makes you dehydrated. So going, dry January can help give you a boost to your skin. It also helps with your immunity because excessive alcohol consumption is linked to a suppressed immune system. So, and that way you may be, able to boost your immune system, especially we're around the flu, and I don't know if COVID is back, but this it happens around this time of the year, so it puts your immune system in the best state to fight any type of disease, or well, not disease but sickness. I also want to mention how if you decide to do dry January, some things that you can consider is you can first again speak with your medical provider, especially if you have an excessive
Yeah.
history of drinking. You don't want to just stop cold turkey. So speaking with your medical provider can help you deal with possible withdrawal symptoms that will possibly happen if you drink excessively. Also, just consider avoiding places that could trigger you. And I think Mary Beth hit on that, as opposed to, like she said, going to the bar, go to a cafe. And the other thing is too, dry January is a great option, but if it needs to be a dry February, do a dry February. Don't
Sure.
just say, "Oh crap, it's January 4. If I had something to drink January 2nd, I can't do it now." Maybe you want to start it next week. But prep yourself. Right, you may need to go into your cupboards, or remove any alcohol you may have if you're trying to refrain from it, or put it in a different part of your house, lock it up, however you want to do it. But, prepare for it, prep for it as well. So that way you can have the best outcome. Anything else to add to that, Mary Beth?
No, those are all really good tips. And you are right. If someone has a severe alcohol use disorder, you actually can die from alcohol withdrawal.
Yes.
It's one reason why some people have to get what's called medically supervised detox for alcohol, opioids, and benzodiazepine sedatives. You can die from sudden sedative withdrawal as well. Or so it is important, if you feel that you're at that level, that you do have a conversation with your doctor, because they can give you medications, or you can go to like a detox center for a couple days and get detoxed off the drug. Very, very important.
Yes. So we are at our last question. And it is, what keeps you passionate? I had passionate about your sobriety journey. But I'm also going to add in that, what keeps you passionate about your sobriety in the work that you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I retired as a judge, it was sort of a new opportunity for me to talk, to contribute to the recovery community because I don't have to worry about professional ramifications anymore. So I can tell my whole story. And so that's when I, was finishing writing the book. I've had like opinion pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. And all that's on my website, by the way, junkie2judge.com. And you can message me through my website if interested. But and I joined the board of Lifing and I joined the board of She Recovery. So what it gave me was an opportunity to think, what do I like doing? Because I could do a lot of different roles in the recovery space, but what do I actually enjoy? And so I enjoy speaking, I enjoy writing, I enjoy engaging with people, talking with people, helping people. And so I created a role for myself that allows me to do that. And then I will also say, I was an excellent legal writer, but when I started reading memoir because I was thinking about writing one, I realized, oh my God, it's written like a novel. Like I don't have that skill set. So I had to go out and get it. Like I took writing classes, memoir, even fiction, like how to write a good scene or how to write good dialogue, all of those things. And I enjoy new challenges and learning new things. And so I tried to find a way that I could be of service, but also feel excited and interested in what I'm doing so that it would keep me engaged.
And anything to add about your sobriety journey? What keeps you passionate about that?
I will say, after the first couple of years, I don't have to focus, on staying sober. That's true for most of like I want to have 32 years sober on the 13th of January. And one of the things yeah, it's great. It is. But one of the things I emphasize that going from 31 to 32, that is not the hard part. Okay. That's
Yeah.
not the hard part. But what keeps me from taking any risk with my sobriety is that the cost is just too high. I mean, the truth is, like sometimes people say to me, you got 31 years, can't you have a beer? And it's like it's not like I think the world would explode, but I think what would happen is I would start negotiating with myself. Like, how often can I have a beer and it's not a problem? Well, if I can have a beer, I can do weed. Well, maybe I could just do meth on my birthday. Like, I think this is where my mind would go. And one of the
Yeah.
joys of recovery is that my mental and emotional energy is not spent on that BS. You know what I mean? It's not spent on
Yeah.
it. I get to spend it on things that I actually want to do and enjoy doing. And so I don't crack that door open. It is when you first get sober, it feels like a major loss, to give up the drugs. It feels like a big loss. But over time, you realize you've lost this and you've like gained this, and so I'm well aware of all that I have gained. I am appreciative of all that I have gained. I'm especially appreciative of the lack of chaos, the lack of turmoil. I mean, life happens. Some parts of the last 31 years have been harder than others, but
Yeah.
I can handle them in a more appropriate way and without making them worse, which is what
Yeah.
would happen if I was using.
Yes. And thank you just for sharing everything. Thank you for the feedback you've given me. Thank you for the feedback and just the insight you've shared from your journey, your professional experience. And so to my audience, I hope you got something out of this. I want